The Hormuz we know contains quite complex aspects. Today, the Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway, connecting the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. To the north lies Iran, and to the south, Oman and the UAE. It serves as a key passage for crude oil and LNG from Middle Eastern, oil-producing nations to reach the world. In short, it is a bottleneck for global energy, a critical point for the economy, and a strait where war and peace meet. 1. Importance from an economic perspective. If the Strait of Hormuz becomes unstable, the first things to be shaken are oil prices, transportation costs, insurance premiums, and the general price level. If it becomes dangerous for ships to pass through, marine insurance premiums rise and shipping companies must calculate the costs of detours, waiting times, and escorts. These costs can eventually spread to the prices of petroleum products, electricity rates, airfares, logistics costs, and food. The U.S. Energy Information Agency EIA explained that the flow of oil passing through the Strait of Hormuz in 2024 averages about 20 million barrels per day, accounting for approximately 20% of global liquid oil consumption. In addition, approximately 20% of global LNG trade volume in 2024 passed through this strait, with Qatari LNG accounting for a particularly large share. In other words, the Strait of Hormuz is not merely a regional sea route, but a switch for global prices that affects Korea, Japan, China, India, and even Europe. For countries like Korea, which are highly dependent on energy imports, tensions in this region can directly lead to increased industrial costs and a higher cost of living. 2. Importance in crude oil and gas. The core of the Strait of Hormuz is its role as a crude oil transport route. A significant amount of crude oil and petroleum products from Persian Gulf, oil-producing nations such as Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the UAE, Qatar, and Iran passes through this strait. The International Energy Agency IEA also explains that by 2025, approximately 25% of global seaborne crude oil trade will have passed through the Strait of Hormuz, and alternative routes are limited. While Saudi Arabia and the UAE can bypass the route via some pipelines, countries such as Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain rely on this strait for a significant portion of their exports. The crucial point here is that if it is blocked, there is no way to bypass it entirely. Unlike the Suez Canal, which has alternative routes that take a long detour, crude oil and LNG located within the Persian Gulf must ultimately pass through this narrow outlet. Therefore, the Strait of Hormuz is akin to a valve on the sea. If the valve closes, supply decreases. If supply decreases, oil prices rise. And if oil prices rise, the global economy faces pressure. 3. Importance in the aspects of war and peace. The Strait of Hormuz is also militarily sensitive. Iran controls the northern coast, and the U.S. and Western navies pay attention to this region under the pretext of protecting freedom of navigation. For Gulf oil-producing nations, if export routes are blocked, their national finances and security are simultaneously shaken. If war breaks out, or there is a threat of a blockade of the strait, the following events could occur. First, the risk of attacks. Seizures and mine-laying on oil tankers increases. Second, the possibility of military conflict between the United States, Iran, and Gulf states grows. Third, global financial markets and oil prices react immediately. Fourth, countries will step forward to release strategic oil reserves, provide naval escorts, and engage in diplomatic mediation. Conversely, if peace is maintained, the Strait of Hormuz becomes a channel for global economic stability. Ships can move freely, crude oil and LNG are supplied stably, and both oil-producing and consuming nations can engage in predictable economic activities. Therefore, while this strait could become a passage of war, if managed well, it can also become a passage of coexistence. 4. Future perspective. The importance of the Strait of Hormuz will gradually change in the future, but it will not disappear immediately. Even as the world shifts toward renewable energy and electric vehicles, oil and LNG remain necessary for industry, aviation, shipping, petrochemicals, heating, and power generation. 3 trends are important in the future. First is energy transition. If countries reduce their dependence on oil, the influence of Hormuz could diminish in the long term. However, until the transition is fully complete, it could actually deliver a greater shock during times of instability. Second, there are alternative transport routes and strategic reserve systems. The bypass pipelines of Saudi Arabia and the UAE, national strategic oil reserves, LNG storage facilities, and the diversification of supply sources will become increasingly important. Third, there is cooperation on maritime security. Rather than being exclusively controlled by a single country, a system is needed to guarantee freedom of navigation, based on international law and diplomacy. 5. Hopeful conclusion. Although the Strait of Hormuz is narrow, it encompasses global oil prices, electricity rates, logistics costs, national security, and the interplay of war and peace. If gunfire rings out here, the global market shakes. If peace flows through it, the world economy breathes. The hope for the future is clear. The Strait of Hormuz must become a sea of trade, not a sea of weapons. It must become a strait of coexistence, not a strait of blockade. It must not be a battleground for great powers, but rather a common lifeline for humanity that oil-producing and consuming nations must protect together. We are not an oil-producing nation, but an energy importer. Therefore, peace in the Strait of Hormuz is not merely a matter concerning other countries, but a real-world issue connected to our prices, our industries, and our cost of living. Ultimately, the best future lies in building an economy less swayed by oil, while the international community collectively safeguards the stability and peace of the Strait of Hormuz during this transitional period. From our perspective, Hormuz is like a father's heart.